I have a really weird and creepy story from when I was a kid, and I really don't know what it was that I saw, but whatever it was not human. On top of that, I want to start this story with what I guess would be a trigger warning. This story is not a happy one. It does not involve a happy ending, but it does involve my childhood dog. If you choose to read this one, this should serve as a warning to your listeners that if they can't stand things happening to dogs, it's recommended that they skip this story. So, this story happened back when I was a kid. I believe that I was around 10 years old at the time, give or take a year. I'm in my 50s now, so it was a subjectively long time ago, to be honest. I'm sorry that I can't remember the exact year that this happened. At this time, I lived with my parents, my big brother, and my pet dog, Aries. Aries was a small dog, smaller than a retriever but bigger than a Shih Tzu. I don't remember what exactly he was, mostly because he was pretty much just a mutt. But he was a good dog, and he was very protective of me and my brother. When I say protective, I mean really protective. When my uncle came over, if he tried to give me or Brian a hug, Aries would bark and try to bite his leg. That was actually why we called him Aries. He was like a little warlord, attacking anything that he didn't want near his family. Now, where we lived wasn't heavily populated, but I can't say that it was completely desolate. Just that there weren't many houses in the area. There were a lot of woods, however, and with the woods come things like coyotes, foxes, and things like that. I'd seen all that in my few years alive, and I knew what they were, how they looked, and what they sounded like when they cried. There were also claims of wolves and wildcats living in the woods near the house too, though I had never seen any of those. This may all sound like I'm just rambling, but I'm trying to show that I knew what all these things were, and if what I saw was one of those, I would have most likely been able to identify it. The first time that I saw this thing was one day when I was outside playing after school. It was the middle of autumn, and the leaves were starting to turn color, and it was starting to get a bit colder. I was out back, swinging a stick, probably pretending that I was a knight and battling for my made-up kingdom, when I heard what sounded like a person crying out behind my yard. This didn't sound like a child. It sounded like an adult was weeping out in the trees. Like they wanted to sob, but they were controlling themselves and holding it all in as best as they could. I remember that this caught me off guard, and my curiosity ended up getting the best of me. I needed to know why there was an adult out in the woods and why they were crying. I went over to the back of the fence, and I looked out into the woods, trying to see if I could find the person that was crying. At first, I couldn't see anything. But after kind of glancing around the trees, I noticed that there was what looked like a man standing out in the woods near one of the trees, and I remember chuckling to myself because he looked like he was naked. Again, I was like 9 or 10, so it was just kind of funny to me that this person was standing naked out in the woods like that. But as I kept staring, something about him felt wrong. He looked like he was too skinny to be alive, really. Like, his skin was the only thing blocking his skeleton from the wind. And as quickly as I thought it was funny, I started feeling a bit scared. It was at this point that Aries started growling and barking at the person, and as soon as he did, this thing turned around to look at me, and I will never forget its face. It was flat, like there was no nose. His eyes were dark black, his mouth looked larger than a normal person's, and it looked like he had fangs, or sharp and really cut teeth. I could see all of this from where I was standing, and he wasn't anywhere near me. And that should tell you how much of an impact that visual had on me. I freaked out. I immediately ran back to the house. Aries was following me, but he was also stopping and barking at the back of the yard every few steps. But after a few moments, he ran with me back to the house. I had no idea what to really do with this event, so I just kind of sat in my room and had what I now know to be a panic attack. This thing was terrifying. It looked human, but it definitely wasn't. And it wasn't any of the aforementioned creatures. I remember my brother coming into my room and asking if I was okay, because he said he could hear me crying from his room. Which was a surprise to me, because I wasn't even aware that I was actually crying. I told him that I saw something in the woods that scared me, and when I tried to explain what it was, he said that it sounded weird, but that it probably wasn't a big deal, that it was just a sick animal or something. He was older than me, so I assumed he was probably right, but deep down, I knew that that was wrong. Now, if that was the only time that I ever saw this thing, it would have been one too many times. But it wasn't. And the next time that I saw it was where things got worse. I want to add again that this second time is the disturbing event that I mentioned earlier, and this is your fair warning that things did not end well. The second time that I saw it was about a week later. I was out back again, just sitting on my slide and staring out into the woods. After I saw that thing, I was actually scared to do much outside, but my parents were the type to tell me to go play outside all the time, so I would pretty much just sit there and stare out into the woods, seeing if this thing would come back. And unfortunately, it did. This time it was a lot closer. I was watching the trees and I noticed that this thing was standing out in the woods, basically just crawling on its knuckles. This time, in a moment of stupidity and bravery, I actually shouted at it, telling it to go away. I don't know if I thought that this thing would understand me or what, but that's what I did. When I shouted, this thing turned to face me, and it started to do its weird crawl, walk motion in my direction towards the fence. Unfortunately, this was enough for Aries to freak out. He actually ran towards the fence and dug out the small spot in the corner and went under the fence out into the woods, barking aggressively and chasing this thing. The creature did start to run, I guess further into the woods, but Aries was unrelenting, and he kept chasing him. I started shouting for him, but he completely ignored me. I ran back to the house, and I shouted for my dad, saying that Aries got out and was chasing something into the woods. I wanted to tell him that it was some kind of monster, some human-like beast, but the only word I could get out of my mind was something. I won't bore you with the conversation and how we went out to call for him beyond saying that my dad jumped the fence and went out into the woods looking for him while I stayed at the fence. After a while, he told me to go inside and get my mom, and to stay inside until they came back, which I did. I later found out that the reason he told me to get my mom and stay inside was because he did find Aries, but what he found wasn't pleasant. They both explained to me that Aries was unfortunately gone, and they then had to explain that things like this happen sometimes in nature. I tried to describe what the thing was that I saw, but they basically told me that it was likely something like a wolf that had gotten to him. I was insistent, but they just dismissed me and told me that they would bury him out in the woods and that it would be okay. Obviously, I was devastated. Aries was a good boy. He just wanted to protect me, and whatever the hell this monster was had killed him. That was actually the last time that I saw this thing, and unfortunately my family just accepts that it was probably a wolf or something, and Aries just wasn't big enough to hold his own. But I know that's wrong. I know that This thing was some sort of humanoid monster, not a wolf. I hate that this whole thing was probably my fault. If I hadn't shouted at it, it probably wouldn't have started approaching, and Ares probably wouldn't have gone after it. But I can't blame myself. Ares was trying to protect me from this thing, and he did his job, as it never did come back. I will always love and honor that pup as being the guardian that he was, and I will never forget what that thing was that I saw. That horrifying face and the disgusting frame that this thing had as it slowly approached me that day.